The first thing Emily Carter felt when she woke up was a cold. Not the sharp, biting cold of winter, but a sterile chill that crept into her bones and refused to leave. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and something metallic, a steady beeping echo beside her, slow and mechanical, like a clock counting down time she couldn't control. Her throat was dry, painfully dry, and when she tried to swallow, a dull ache spread through her abdomen, deep and heavy, as if her body had been torn open and stitched back together by strangers. She moved her head slightly, wincing, and instinctively reached out with her hand. Nothing. No warm fingers wrapped around hers. No familiar voice whispering that everything had gone well. Just empty air and white sheets pulled too tight around her fragile body. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. She blinked hard, trying to focus, try to remember where she was and why everything hurt. Then it came back to her. The operating room, the bright lights, the cold metal railings of the stretcher, and her children, her 4 children, standing around her just before they wheeled her away. They had all been there. Michael, her eldest, tall and serious, his brow creased with worry as he squeezed her hand. "Don't worry, Mom," he had said firmly. "We're going to take turns staying with you. You won't be alone for even one day. I promise." David stood beside him, nodding in agreement, already pulling out his phone to check his work schedule, assuring her he'd rearrange things. Sarah's eyes were glossy with tears as she leaned in to kiss Emily's cheek, whispering that she'd bring her favorite soup when she woke up. And Daniel, her youngest, her baby even at 33, had bent down and kissed her forehead softly. "Everything's going to be fine, Mommy. We've got you." Those words had wrapped around her heart like a blanket. Now, lying alone in that cold hospital bed, the memory of those promises hurt more than the incision in her body. A nurse entered the room, her shoes squeaking against the polished floor. She flipped through a chart without looking up. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Carter?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. Emily opened her mouth to answer, but the word got stuck somewhere between her chest and her throat. How was she feeling? Confused, exposed, unbelievably alone. Instead, she managed a weak nod. The nurse checked the 4, adjusted a monitor, and left as quickly as she had come. The door closed. Silence returned. Emily turned her head toward the empty chair beside her bed. It was supposed to be filled. Someone was supposed to be sitting there, scrolling on their phone, complaining about hospital coffee, asking the doctor too many questions. That was what families did. That was what her children had promised. She told herself not to panic. It was probably just the timing. Chicago traffic was terrible. Someone must be on their way. She glanced at the clock on the wall. An hour passed. Then 2. Her phone buzzed. Her heart jumped, and she grabbed it with shaking hands. A message in the family group chat. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up at work. I'll come later." Later. That word clung to her mind. Another hour passed. Another message arrived. "Kids are sick today. Can't make it. Maybe tomorrow." Emily stared at the screen, her eyes burning. She typed a reply, erased it, typed again, then locked the phone without sending anything. She didn't want to sound needy. She didn't want to complain. She was their mother. She had always been the strong one. By the end of the first day, no one had come. On the second day, the physical pain intensified. Every breath felt heavier. Every movement reminded her of the surgery. But the ache in her chest was worse. That slow, crushing pressure that made her question things she had never questioned before. Had she done something wrong? She had raised her children alone for 23 years after her husband, Robert, died in a factory accident. 23 years of double shifts, skipped meals, worn-out shoes. She had missed vacations, birthdays of her own, moments she could never get back. Everything had gone to them. School clothes, college fees, emergency bills. She had never once asked for anything in return. And now, lying in a public hospital bed, she couldn't even get a visit. By the 3rd day, Emily stopped checking the clock so often. By the 4th day, she stopped checking her phone. The messages had slowed anyway, each one more distant than the last. On the 5th day, she began walking the corridors alone, dragging her four-pole beside her, forcing herself forward step by step. Other patients passed her, supported by daughters, sons, spouses. Laughter echoed softly from some rooms. Gentle conversations. Life continuing. Emily kept her eyes down and her lips pressed tight, so no one would see the tears threatening to spill. On the 7th day, a young nurse named Jenny sat on the edge of her bed. Jenny had kind eyes and a softness about her that reminded Emily of the woman she used to be. She hesitated before speaking. "Mrs. Carter," she said gently, "do you have any family who can help you when you're discharged?" The question landed like a blow. Emily swallowed hard. "I have 4 children," she replied. Jenny nodded slowly, her expression filled with something unspoken. Pity, understanding. Emily recognized it instantly. It was the look people gave when they already knew the answer. In that moment, Emily understood how the world saw her now, not as a mother who had given everything, not as a woman with a story and a history, just another elderly black woman lying alone in a hospital bed, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. If this story is touching something deep inside you, welcome to my channel, where we share true, emotional stories about family, dignity, and kindness. Please take a moment to subscribe, so you don't miss stories that remind us what truly matters in life. The days dragged on. Medical rounds, medication schedules, meals left untouched. Her children stopped answering her calls entirely. Messages were left unread. The wound in her body began to heal, slowly, but something inside her was unraveling much faster. On the 15th day, the doctor came in with a clipboard and a professional smile. "You're stable enough to go home, Mrs. Carter," he said, "but you'll need rest and someone to help you for at least 2 more weeks." Emily nodded as if that someone existed. She packed her few belongings into a thin plastic bag and sat at the edge of the bed, waiting. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, she opened her phone and ordered an Uber. Her fingers trembled as she typed her address. The driver was an older man with gray at his temples. He glanced at her through the rearview mirror, but didn't ask questions. Emily was grateful. She wasn't sure she could explain why a woman fresh out of surgery was going home alone. As the car pulled away from the hospital, Emily looked out at the familiar streets, the same sidewalks where she had once held her children's hands, the same corners where they waited for the bus on cold mornings. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. When the car stopped in front of her house, a chill ran through her. The front door was slightly open. She frowned. She was careful. She always locked up. Slowly, painfully, she climbed out of the car and walked toward the door, her heart pounding harder with each step. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The silence inside the house was heavier than the silence in the hospital. The living room was in chaos. Cushions were out of place. Drawers stood open. Papers littered the floor. This wasn't a burglary done in haste. It was deliberate, purposeful. "Hello?" Emily called out weakly. No answer. She moved further in, her breath shallow, her body screaming for rest. Then she saw it. The empty space against the wall where her grandmother's mahogany hutch had stood for decades. The hutch that had survived war, migration, and generations of family history. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. Something was terribly wrong. And she was about to learn that the deepest wounds are not the ones made by surgeons, but the ones made by the people we trust the most. Emily stood there for a long moment, gripping the doorframe as if it were the only thing holding her upright. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could hear in her ears. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place that had been violated, stripped of something sacred. She took a careful step forward, then another, moving slowly so she wouldn't tear the stitches in her abdomen. Every inch of her body protested, but fear pushed her onward. She needed to understand what had happened. She needed to know how much was gone. The living room looked as if someone had searched in a hurry, but without panic. Sofa cushions were tossed aside. The drawers of the old cabinet were pulled open and left that way, as if whoever did this knew there was no need to rush. Papers lay scattered on the floor, old bills, greeting cards, handwritten notes she had kept for years. Her life reduced to loose pages. Emily bent down with difficulty and picked up a folded birthday card. It was from Daniel, written when he was 10. "Thank you for always believing in me, Mom." It read in uneven handwriting. Her throat tightened. She pressed the card to her chest for a moment before placing it carefully back on the table, as if trying to restore order where none existed. She moved toward the dining room, her slippers whispering softly against the floor. That was when she saw it clearly, the empty wall. The space where her grandmother's mahogany hutch had always stood looked naked, wrong. That hutch wasn't just furniture. It was history. Her grandmother Betty had carried stories of survival inside those drawers, stories passed down during quiet evenings when Emily was a child, listening wide-eyed. Emily closed her eyes, hoping when she opened the hutch would be there again, solid and familiar. But when she looked, the wall was still bare. Her breathing grew shallow. She leaned against the table, waiting for the dizziness to pass. Someone hadn't just taken objects. They had taken pieces of her life. A thought crept into her mind, slow and unsettling. Who would know exactly what to take? Who would know which things mattered most? She didn't want to think the answer. Gathering what little strength she had left, Emily began climbing the stairs. Each step felt like lifting a weight she wasn't meant to carry. She held the railing tightly, her knuckles white, whispering small encouragements to herself. Slowly, just slowly. At the top of the stairs, she paused, listening. The house was silent, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow. Her bedroom door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The bed was unmade, the covers pulled back as if someone had sat there. Her dresser drawers were open. Her heart sank deeper with every detail. She moved toward the bed and saw her jewelry box lying open on the blanket. For a brief second, relief washed over her. The box was still there. She reached for it with trembling hands. Inside were her costume earrings, the fake pearl necklace she wore to church, a bracelet she bought herself years ago as a rare treat. Everything seemed untouched. Everything except one thing. Emily's fingers searched every compartment, slower now, because she already knew. She searched anyway, hoping she was wrong. But the truth was impossible to ignore. Her husband's gold ring was gone. The room spun. Emily sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the pain in her abdomen flaring sharply. That ring was expensive by any measure that mattered to the world. But to her it was priceless. It had belonged to Robert's grandfather, passed down through generations. Robert had slipped it onto her finger on their 15th anniversary, smiling that soft smile she missed every day. "This is the only thing of real value I own," he'd told her, "and I want you to have it." She had promised him she would protect it, guard it, keep it safe, and now it was gone. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't cry yet. She felt strangely numb, as if her body had decided it couldn't handle any more pain at once. That was when she noticed a piece of paper taped to her mirror. It was folded neatly, almost carefully. Emily stood and walked toward it, her steps uncertain. She peeled the paper off the mirror and unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Michael, Mom, we sold some things to pay expenses. Don't get mad. They were just old objects you weren't using anymore. The money was needed. When you recover, we'll talk." Emily read the note once, then again, then a third time. Each word felt heavier than the last. Old objects. Weren't using anymore. The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. Her grandmother's hutch, her husband's ring, reduced to things. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked older than her 67 years. Her face was drawn, her eyes sunken and dark with exhaustion. Her gray hair was uncombed, falling around her face in a way she didn't recognize. But what frightened her most wasn't how she looked. It was the emptiness in her eyes. The look of someone who had just realized that the people she loved most had crossed a line they could never uncross. Emily sank back onto the bed and sat there for a long time, holding the note in her lap. Memories flooded her mind. Teaching Michael to ride a bike, helping David with homework late at night, braiding Sarah's hair before school, rocking Daniel to sleep after nightmares. All those years of love, of patience, of sacrifice. Had none of it mattered? Her phone buzzed beside her. The sound startled her. For a brief, foolish second, hope flickered. Maybe one of them had realized what they'd done. Maybe someone was coming. She picked up the phone. A message in the family group chat. Mom's out of the hospital. Can anyone stop by to check on her? David had sent it. Emily watched as the replies appeared one by one. I can't today, Sarah wrote. Too much going on. Maybe later, Daniel replied, hours after the message. Michael's response came last. She's old enough to take care of herself. Emily set the phone down gently, as if it were something fragile that might shatter. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, then another. Soon they were falling freely, silent but relentless. She cried for Robert, for the promise she couldn't keep. She cried for her grandmother and the stories that would never be told again. She cried for the version of herself that had believed love alone was enough. And somewhere between those tears, a realization began to take shape. If her children could do this while she lay helpless in a hospital bed, then this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was a choice. The house around her felt emptier than ever, not because of what was missing, but because of what had been revealed. The truth had finally come into the light, and it was painful, but it was clear. Emily wiped her face slowly and took a deep breath, steadying herself. She didn't know yet what she would do. She only knew that she could never see her children the same way again. Outside, the afternoon light filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Emily sat there quietly, holding the note, listening to the sound of her own breathing. Something inside her had broken, but something else, something quiet and strong, was beginning to wake up. Emily sat on the edge of the bed long after the light outside had begun to fade. The house creaked softly, settling into the evening, but nothing about it felt familiar anymore. She held her phone in both hands, staring at the screen as if it might speak first. Her fingers hovered over Michael's name. She didn't want to call. She already knew the truth, but there were some truths that demanded to be heard out loud, even if they shattered what little was left. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, he answered. Hey, Mom, Michael said, his voice casual, almost cheerful. You're out of the hospital already? That tone, light unconcerned, cut deeper than any harsh word could have. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. Where's your father's ring? She asked. Her voice surprised even her. It didn't shake. It didn't rise. It came out calm, flat, and cold in a way she had never spoken to her son before. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then a sigh. Mom, we needed money, Michael said. Jessica and I have bills. Debts. The ring was just sitting there. We got $2,000 for it. $2,000. Emily felt something heavy settle in her chest, like a door closing quietly but forever. 80 years of history. Love passed from hand to hand, reduced to a number. And Grandma Betty's hutch? She asked. Oh, David handled that, Michael replied quickly. I think he got about $1,200. Look, Mom, I know you're emotional because of the surgery, but it's not that big a deal. It was just stuff. Just stuff. Emily stared at the wall across from her, her eyes landing on the empty space where the hutch had once stood. She could almost see her grandmother there, humming softly, telling her stories about survival and faith. She wondered what Grandma Betty would have said if she could see this moment. We're your family, Michael continued. We matter more than old furniture or some ring. You're alive. That's what matters. Emily listened in silence. Every word peeled away another layer of illusion she hadn't realized she was still holding on to. These weren't confused children who had made a mistake. These were adults who had weighed memories against money and chosen money. She ended the call without another word. The phone slipped from her hand and landed softly on the bed. Emily sat very still. She felt strangely empty, as if all the tears she had cried earlier had drained something essential out of her. In their place was a quiet clarity that felt unfamiliar but steady. Her phone buzzed again. A message from David appeared on the screen. Mom, why are you upset? We'll replace the furniture later. Replace. As if some things could ever be replaced. Another message followed, this one from Sarah. You know we didn't mean to hurt you. You're overreacting. Overreacting. Emily let out a slow breath and placed the phone face down on the bed. She was tired, not just physically, but in a way that reached her bones. She had spent her whole life explaining herself, defending her feelings, making space for everyone else's needs. She didn't have the strength for that anymore. That night, she slept fitfully, waking often from dreams where she was calling out for someone who never turned around. Each time she woke, the pain in her body reminded her that this wasn't a dream at all. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, landing on her face. Emily lay still, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood waking up, a dog barking, a car starting, someone laughing in the distance, life moving forward. She slowly pushed herself up and shuffled into the kitchen. The refrigerator was nearly empty. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the table, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. The warmth helped. So did the quiet. There was a knock at the door. Emily froze. Her heart skipped, a reflex she couldn't control. For a split second, she imagined one of her children standing there, apologetic, ready to make things right. She opened the door. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, holding a small pot covered with foil. "I saw you came home yesterday," Mrs. Thompson said gently. "Thought you might not feel up to cooking." Emily felt her throat tighten. She stepped aside to let her in. Mrs. Thompson set the pot on the counter. "Chicken soup," she said with a smile. "Nothing fancy, but it's warm." Emily nodded, unable to speak right away. Kindness had become such a rare thing the past few weeks that it almost overwhelmed her. Mrs. Thompson didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. She simply sat with Emily at the table, talking about small things. The weather, the garden, the birds that nested in the old oak tree down the street. When she left, the house felt a little less empty. Later that afternoon, Nurse Jenny called to check on her. "I was thinking about you," she said. "I just want to make sure you got home safely." Emily thanked her. After the call ended, she sat quietly, letting something sink in. Kindness was still there in the world. It just wasn't coming from where she had expected it. That evening, Emily picked up her phone again. She scrolled through old photos, birthdays, graduations, family holidays, faces smiling back at her, frozen in moments when she believed love would always be enough to hold them together. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger required energy she no longer had. What she felt instead was a deep, aching disappointment. And beneath that, a resolve she had never felt before. She opened her contacts and searched for a name she hadn't thought about in years. Mr. Harris, her husband's old friend, a lawyer. Her finger hovered over the call button. She hesitated, then pressed it. "Emily?" Mr. Harris said, surprise warming his voice. "It's been a long time." "Yes," she replied softly. "It has. I need some advice." They spoke for a while. Emily didn't go into every detail. She didn't need to. Mr. Harris listened carefully, asking gentle questions, explaining things clearly. When the call ended, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, a sense of control. The days that followed were quiet. Emily moved slowly, following the doctor's instructions, taking her medication, resting when she needed to. Her children didn't come by. A few messages appeared in the group chat, casual, distant, as if nothing had changed. Emily didn't respond. She spent time sitting by the window, watching the world outside. She thought about her life, not just the sacrifices, but the strength it had taken to keep going when everything felt heavy. She realized she had survived far worse than this. Widowhood, poverty, raising 4 children alone in a world that rarely showed kindness to women who looked like her. This pain was different, but it wasn't the end. One afternoon, as she sat with her tea, Emily whispered something aloud for the first time. "I deserve better." The words felt strange on her tongue, but also right. She didn't know exactly what she would do next. She didn't have a grand plan, but she knew this much. She would no longer beg for love from people who treated her memories like merchandise. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. Emily watched it quietly, feeling the weight of everything she had lost, and the quiet strength of what she was beginning to reclaim. The illusion of family had shattered, but in its place, something honest was taking root. The days began to settle into a quiet rhythm after that. Emily learned her body again, slowly, patiently, the way one learns a new language after forgetting the old one. She woke early, not because she wanted to, but because the pain never let her sleep too long. She moved carefully through the house, one hand always pressed against her abdomen, the other holding on to furniture for balance. Every step reminded her that healing was not something you rushed. It demanded respect. In the mornings, she sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching sunlight creep across the floor. The house was still missing pieces, but she stopped staring at the empty spaces. She told herself they were not holes. They were pauses, places where something else might one day belong. Mrs. Thompson came by every few days, sometimes with food, sometimes just to sit and talk. She never asked about Emily's children. Somehow, she seemed to know that silence was kindling questions. They spoke about memories instead, about the neighborhood before it changed, about music, about church dresses and old recipes. Laughter returned to the house in small, gentle doses, like medicine taken carefully. Nurse Jenny called again at the end of the week. "You sound stronger," she said. "I am," Emily replied, surprised to realize it was true. Strength, she was learning, did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in the simple act of getting out of bed alone and choosing to keep going. One afternoon, Emily found herself opening the old photo albums she had kept in a box under her bed. She hadn't touched them since Robert passed. The smell of aged paper filled the room as she turned the pages slowly. There they were, faces frozen in time. Her children as babies, smiling with gaps in their teeth. Robert standing behind her with his arm around her waist, proud and steady. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, but it no longer crushed her the way it once did. These memories were hers. They could not be sold. They could not be taken. Emily began to write. At first, it was just a few lines in a notebook she found in the kitchen drawer, thoughts she needed to put somewhere other than her heart. Then those lines became pages. She wrote about raising her children alone, about nights she went to bed hungry so they could eat, about promises made and promises broken. She didn't write with anger. She wrote with honesty. The writing didn't fix anything, but it helped her breathe. A few days later, she met with Mr. Harris. He came to the house, walking slowly beside her as if he already understood how fragile her steps were. They sat at the table together, paper spread neatly between them. Emily listened carefully as he explained things, options, protections, boundaries, words like will, power of attorney, assets. None of it felt vengeful. It felt practical. "You have the right to be safe," Mr. Harris told her, "especially now." Emily nodded. For years, she had given her children access to everything without question, not because they asked, but because she trusted them. Trust, she realized, was not the same as protection. Love didn't mean leaving every door unlocked. When he left, Emily sat quietly, her hands resting on the papers. She wasn't afraid. If anything, she felt calmer than she had in a long time. She wasn't closing her heart. She was simply learning where it needed walls. Her children noticed a change before she ever said a word. Messages began to come more frequently. Short check-ins at first. Then questions. "Mom, did you talk to a lawyer? Why are you being distant? We're family. You're acting strange." Emily read them without responding. She no longer felt the urgency to explain herself. She had spent decades explaining herself. This time, she chose stillness. One evening, Daniel showed up unexpectedly. Emily heard the knock and felt her chest tighten, but she didn't panic. She opened the door slowly. Daniel stood there holding a bag of groceries, his expression uncertain. "I was in the area," he said. "Thought I'd check on you." She stepped aside and let him in. He looked around the house, taking the changes, the missing furniture, the neat stacks of paperwork on the table. He avoided her eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "I'm healing," Emily replied simply. They stood in silence for a moment. Daniel shifted his weight, uncomfortable. We didn't mean for things to get like this, he said. Emily looked at him then, really looked at him. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a grown man who had made choices. She spoke gently but firmly. Intent doesn't erase impact, she said. You took from me when I couldn't protect myself. Daniel swallowed. We thought you wouldn't notice, or that it wouldn't matter. Emily nodded slowly. That's what hurts the most. He didn't stay long. When he left, Emily felt no relief, no triumph, just clarity. That night, she sat by the window again, watching the streetlights flicker on. She thought about the younger version of herself, the woman who believed that if she loved enough, sacrificed enough, she could protect everyone from becoming careless with her heart. She knew better now. Over the next few weeks, Emily's strength returned little by little. She walked farther each day. She cooked simple meals. She laughed more easily. The pain didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip, and something else began to grow in its place. Peace. She visited a small senior community one afternoon, invited by Mrs. Thompson's sister. The place was warm, full of conversation and soft music. People greeted her with smiles that carried no expectations. No one knew her history. No one asked what she could give. They only asked her name. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt seen without being measured. She didn't make any decisions that day. She didn't need to. Just knowing there were places in the world where dignity came freely was enough for now. That evening, she returned home and stood in the living room, looking at the empty wall once more. This time, she didn't feel grief. She imagined something new there, a painting, a shelf of books, a symbol of what she had chosen for herself. Emily went to bed that night with a quiet certainty in her heart. She had been abandoned, betrayed, hurt in ways that would take time to heal. But she was still here, and for the first time in a long time, her future felt like something she could shape with her own hands. Continue, E. Emily didn't rush into change. She let it come the way healing always had in her life. Slowly, honestly, without forcing it. Weeks passed, then months. The scar on her abdomen faded from angry red to a soft, pale line, a quiet reminder of everything her body had endured. But the deeper healing was happening inside her, in ways no doctor could measure. She kept her routine simple. Mornings with tea and sunlight. Short walks when the weather allowed. Afternoons filled with reading, writing, or sitting quietly with her thoughts. The house no longer felt like a place of loss. It felt like a space waiting to be filled with intention. Mr. Harris returned one afternoon with finalized documents. They sat together at the kitchen table, the same place where Emily had once helped her children with homework and listened to their dreams. Now, she listened to her own. She signed the papers calmly. Her will was clear, her finances protected, decisions made not out of anger, but out of self-respect. This is about peace, she said softly as she set the pen down. Mr. Harris nodded. That's exactly what it should be. A few weeks later, Emily made another decision, one she had been turning over in her mind for some time. She placed the house on the market, not because she hated it, but because she had outgrown the pain tied to its walls. The house held memories she would always carry, but she didn't need to live inside them. When the offer came, she accepted it without hesitation. The day she handed over the keys, Emily stood on the front porch one last time. She rested her hand against the doorframe and whispered a quiet goodbye, not to the house, but to the version of herself who had lived there believing love meant enduring anything. Her children found out soon after. The messages came quickly this time. What do you mean you sold the house? Where are you going? You can't make decisions like this without us. Emily read them all, then turned her phone off. She moved into a small, bright apartment in a senior community filled with warmth and laughter. People greeted her by name. They asked her about her favorite music, her favorite food, her favorite memories. They didn't ask what she owned or what she could give. Emily joined morning walking groups and afternoon book clubs. She learned the names of the staff, learned who liked extra sugar in their coffee, who always hummed while folding laundry. Kindness moved through the place like a gentle current. One day, she donated part of the money from the house to a local program that supported elderly black women who had no family to rely on. She visited the center quietly, sitting with women who reminded her of herself, strong, tired, resilient. She listened to their stories and shared pieces of her own. For the first time, Emily felt her pain become something useful. Her children eventually came to see her. They arrived together one afternoon, standing awkwardly in the common room. They looked uncomfortable, uncertain, like visitors in a place they didn't belong. Emily greeted them politely and invited them to sit. Michael spoke first. "We didn't realize how serious everything was," he said. "We just assumed you'd be okay." Emily looked at him with steady eyes. "Assumptions can be cruel," she replied. David apologized next. His words hurried, filled with excuses. Sarah cried and said she felt guilty. Daniel stared at the floor, silent. Emily listened without interrupting. When they finished, she spoke calmly. "I love you," she said. "That hasn't changed. But love doesn't mean access. It doesn't mean you get to decide my worth or my boundaries." They tried to argue, to explain, to justify. Emily raised her hand gently. "I'm not punishing you," she said. "I'm choosing myself." The room fell quiet. She told them she was safe, cared for, and at peace. She told them she hoped one day they would understand what they had done, not just to her belongings, but to her trust. When they left, Emily didn't feel empty. She felt settled. That evening, she sat on a bench outside the community garden, watching the sun dip below the trees. Children laughed in the distance. Someone nearby played soft music. Life moved forward, steady and kind. Emily smiled. She had been abandoned at her weakest moment, but she had discovered something powerful in that loneliness. Her own strength. She lost the illusion of family, but she gained dignity, peace, and a future shaped by choice. And for the first time in her life, Emily Carter belonged fully to herself.